Government and the Supreme Court of Brazil are still doing their push to censor social media in Brazil. Their legislation failed the vote, but that doesn't actually mean anything. The legislation will be forced into law somehow, probably by the Supreme Court decision, which is mental. And in the middle of that, Google and Telegram were censored, and a lot more crazy stuff is happening. But, you know what it is. Democracy is when they win. If they don't, you're a Nazi. And it's interesting how this dynamic in Brazil is really close to what's happening in a lot of different countries. And it's only legitimate or democratic when the right guys win. And if people win, well, they're Nazis or fascists or they want to kill children, or that's the discussion. This is an update on a previous video I've done on the legislation in Brazil that will cause censorship in social media. I've done a full video on that previously, but to summarize, what the legislation does is it creates very subjective and wide mechanisms and mandates for social media, things that they have to do to combat terrorism or attacks on democracy on social media, but it's so vague that it's whatever the government thinks it is. And social media have to do things like diligently work to combat those things, which means nothing. I mean, they can do whatever they want, and governments that can still come in and say, I don't think you have done enough to combat these things, which I have considered an attack on democracy, and therefore I'm going to fine you or block you or ban you entirely. And I have deemed these things to be incitements of terrorism, or I have deemed these things to be attacks on democracy, and now you have to go after them, and if you don't do it enough or as much as I think you should, I can fine you, I can go after you. So that's generally what it does, and there are a lot of other things, but this is on the previous video, okay? But it went to vote last week, okay? And they would have lost it. They would have won it if it was voted a week previously, but there was a huge push in Brazil, really just by the population, to contact their congressmen, the part where electors, talk to their representatives and voice their opinions, which is what you would think would happen in a republic or a democracy. I mean, I'm a libertarian. I don't think the state should even exist, but those are your roles, right? Okay, so people pushed their representatives and voiced their concerns. They were against the law, and the vote turned. In fact, it was actually beautiful because the right wing and the free market people in Brazil were all disjointed, and it was beautiful to have everyone just coming together to fight this legislation. It was a big push, and we turned the votes. In fact, there was a vote count on the day that the legislation would be voted, and if the law was put to a vote, it would fail. And that's why the president of the lower chamber pulled the legislation. He decided to not vote it, because if you vote and it's rejected, you cannot propose it again for a year, so he can just pull it and come back another day, that type of stuff. But they lost. And, well, when they lose, it's not a democracy. It's only a democracy when they win, because they were claiming that social media made wide disinformation campaigns and harassed the lawmakers. People talked to their representatives. How is that harassment? Well, people were very emotional. Look, what happened was people got together and decided, let's press our lawmakers, which it's the whole point of the thing. And there were a lot of emails, a lot of calls, a lot of comments on social media. Everyone from the center to the right got together and pushing against this legislation. It was just beautiful to see. And one thing that I did was we organized the protests on a few airports to get on the times where politicians would be embarking to Brasilia to vote the legislation, and there was a protest in the Brasilia airport to welcome the politicians. So the idea was to push them against the legislation. And it was just like a handful of people in a lot of airports, because we had to protest at 7 a.m. in a weekday. But it was fun to do, and it was fun that a congressman later said that social media, or Google or Meta or wherever the hell, paid activists to go to the airport and harass politicians. It was us holding signs quietly, not in the way of people. That was it. It was like, they're harassing, they're paying. That was so funny. But anyways, that's what happened. There was a big push. The law failed. So what happens now? Well, the Secretary of Justice, or the Ministry of Justice, is just ministry in English sounds kind of religious, like it's the Ministério da Justiça, it's Secretary of Justice. Yeah, well, you got it. Well, he said, well, if the legislation doesn't pass through the legislative means, because he said something like, because people who like the wild west of the internet have disrupted the legislative process. Like he was thinking of it as like, you're disrupting the legislative process. No, we're doing the legislative process. You lost. But yeah, I mean, when you lose, it's because it's a disruption or it's the Wild West. Or yeah, those people, they don't realize that then government can regulate this just by executive decree, or that the judiciary can just, turn that into law on some bullshit decision. So again, it's that attitude of it's only democratic when we win. So he made those threats, and now the Supreme Court of Brazil has put into their agenda, into their schedule, that on the 17th they're going to start a trial under the constitutionality of some article in a previous internet legislation. And they're pretty much saying, look, we're just going to decide that text, which failed the legislative vote because people do not want it, we're just going to decide that that's the law. I mean, we lost in the vote, but whatever. Which is just a huge joke. So the Supreme Court is going to force into legislation something because the legislative process decided that people do not want that as a legislation. Yet that is going to happen in order to protect democracy and the children. Because that's the speech that they're trying to give. That's the narrative that they're going to try to give to this. Because this legislation is to fight people who are inciting school shootouts. And I mean, I know this is kind of a weird argument because doesn't fully justify the thing, but I mean, the US has like multiple programs to spy on their population, and they still have tons of school shootings. Who in their right mind would think that the Brazilian government would be able to then put in a program to monitor and combat those things, that it would work? Like, I know that's not very much of a good argument, but it's just like one of those funny arguments. Like, the government cannot keep drugs out of jail. So why should I believe that they're going to be able to put in place monitoring programs that are not going to exceed their powers? There's not going to be a problem into that. And they're going to effectively fight school shootouts or, like crazy stuff like that when they cannot keep drugs and prostitution and organized crime outside of jail. Like, this is ridiculous, okay? But that's their narrative. No, the law is to protect the children or to fight crime. There was actually a congressman from the Workers' Party, which is the party of government, the Lula's party, who said that this was to combat crimes on the internet, and it wasn't, and he actually got fact-checked on Twitter, and it was just delicious to see. But anyways, the point is the Supreme Court is going to force this into law. They're going to say, this is it. And they're explicitly breaking the legislative process in order to defend democracy. It gets even more wild when you realize the things that happened during the vote. On last Tuesday, when the vote was going on, Google, a few hours before the vote, put in their main page an article, and in like the search bar, there was an article below it saying, "Oh, the project 2630 can cause censorship," or something like that. And it was just them analyzing the law and say, "Well, there is this thing and this thing. It could cause these things. There are these problems. It's kind of weird. It could lead into censorship, and we're against it." So it's a company voicing their concerns and arguing over the law. So government's reply was to notify the company and throw the judicial system on top of them and claim that they were doing disinformation. So, what? No, this is, they're lying, and this is just propaganda, and... wait a second. Whoa, hold up. You're claiming that you want to protect free speech with a law that can lead to censorship. And if someone uses their company and platform to voice their concerns over that, they're abusing their economic power and disinforming the public. What? And yeah, Google got ordered to take down the article or be fined R$1 million an hour. That is roughly $200,000 an hour. And there was actually a senator asking for rougher measures for condemnations, for fines. And it's like, wait. So I cannot say that the censorship law is a law that will cause censorship, because then I will be censored because I'm disinforming the public. Yeah, that's what happened. So today, a week later, Telegram sent a message to their users, because the law can be voted again, but it's probably going to go through the judiciary anyways, but they're still doing a campaign against it. So Telegram sent a message to their users saying, well, we're concerned about this legislation, because this could cause a lot of problems. This has very subjective and vague criteria. We don't know how we're going to comply with this. We don't know who's going to regulate this. We don't know what the regulation will be. And we are concerned that this could be a tool of repression. And mind you, Telegram was created by a Russian to avoid Russian persecution of a dictatorship. So that's kind of like in their DNA. That's their blood, you know. So they send that message saying, like, we're concerned. Please talk to your representatives, like you do in a democracy, in a republic, where the electors, the voters, can talk to their representatives and voice their concerns. Like, just please be aware of this and talk to your representatives. Okay, so about an hour later, the Supreme Court of Brazil comes in and says, well, you are illegally and immorally attacking the democratic state by inciting people to harass congressmen, and you're abusing your powers by putting up a disinformation campaign, and you, Telegram, must delete the message and send a new message where you admit to having done those things and to having attacked the democratic state and yada, 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 yada. Otherwise, we will take you down in Brazil. You know that joke, like, how is your country doing? And you're like, well, I can't complain. It's like, oh, it's doing well. I can't complain. It's exactly what's going on. And mind you, Telegram was hit last week with another just crazy decision. So there were some anti-Semitic groups on Telegram. We all know that happens. So a judge on an investigation on those groups, yada yada, asked Telegram to provide a whole bunch of information on those guys, and most of it was just technologically impossible. And the Telegram does not have that data. He requested something that was impossible to fulfill, and Telegram got taken down. Now, you may be thinking, wait a second. So a First Circuit judge just made like an impossible request of a social media or like a app messaging service, Telegram, and then when they didn't comply, he just took them down. Like, can like the lower judge do that? Yeah, they can. And like Telegram, it's a meme at this point. Like Telegram gets taken down like 3 or 4 times a year at this point. But hold up, this actually gets funnier. This gets better. Telegram, after a few days, revealed the timeline of their subpoenas and the eventual takedown of Telegram. And what they showed is that they were convicted to be taken down and thus unable to operate in Brazil before they were notified of the decision. So, let me put this in no uncertain terms. An impossible request was made to them. Before the request was presented to them, they were then convicted of not fulfilling the impossible request, and then taken down, and fined and yada yada yada. And we're just supposed to believe that the judicial system and the government will not use legislation to persecute opponents or to influence the discussion or to control the social media. We're just supposed to trust that those judges and politicians understand the technology that they're dealing with, and they will just use that thinking about us, thinking about the children and the women and the minorities. Yeah, that's not gonna happen. So you may be thinking, well, what now? Well, what now that we need to maybe organize protests, something like that, and you get to the rather ridiculous situation where you may organize a protest for freedom of speech and due process of law and get hit with an action saying that you're subverting democracy or organizing terrorism or something like that. Like, we're organizing protests and we're concerned with that. Like, this is how Kafkian this turned. This is wild. And it's one of the reasons I decided to start my YouTube in English channel. Like, this is something I've been thinking about for a few years, and I should have done earlier. But the point is that, like, the world needs to know what's happening in here, because otherwise you just depend on the media informing you, and the media is not going to inform this, because the legislation also has that Australian law which orders social media to pay journalists, to pay newspapers, media, etc., for things that are posted in social media. So the media is in financial interests to disinform you about this law. They're actually supporting the law because they're going to get money off of that. So the odds that the conventional media are going to inform you are nil. So this is why I'm doing those videos, and this is why I ask you to please, just share this video with the international community. We need this to go worldwide. We need the international eyes in Brazil, because that constrains the Supreme Court and the government in Brazil. That that intimidates them sort of into not doing so many crazy things, because it's not going to look good in the international thing. And the international scene actually matters a lot to Brazil. That's why a lot of politicians do things to like virtual signal internationally, that type of stuff. So you can really help us by just spreading the word on this. And I'm sorry that my voice is not that good. Like, that this video wasn't everything that it could be. I'm like super sick and just pushing through this, but well, we do what we can. Bye-bye.